He looked me dead in the eyes, leaned back in that big leather chair of his like he owned the entire world, and said, "You're useless to me now." Just like that. No apology, no hesitation, not even a blink. He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk, a termination letter already signed, and said, "Clean out your desk by noon. Security will walk you out." I was 7 months pregnant. I had given that company 4 years of my life, 4 years of 6 a.m. starts and midnight emails and weekends I will never get back. I had fought for every promotion, earned every single dollar in my paycheck, and never, not once, asked for anything I hadn't earned. And he sat there in the office I helped build his reputation inside of and called me useless. I picked up that termination letter. I read it slowly, and I set it back down on his desk. He smirked like he had already won. He hadn't even finished smirking when his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, and I watched his face change. The color drained out of it like someone had pulled a plug. He answered it. I heard the voice on the other end, firm, calm, and absolutely unmistakable. My father's voice. He said 3 words. "Step outside, Derek." Derek Collins, my boss, the man who had just called me useless, stood up from that chair so fast he knocked his coffee mug off the desk. 47 minutes later, he was the one carrying a box out of the building. My name is Alexandra Morgan, and this is my story. I need you to understand something about me before I go any further, because this story only makes sense if you know who I really am. I was not handed anything. I know, given how this story ends, it's easy to assume I was some kind of pampered little girl who always had a safety net, but that is not the truth, and I refuse to let anyone walk away from this thinking my success was just a matter of having the right last name. My parents divorced when I was 9 years old. My mother, Carol Morgan, raised me and my younger brother, Jason, in a 2-bedroom apartment in Columbus, Ohio. She worked double shifts at a hospital for most of my childhood. She was a woman who ironed her scrubs the night before every shift, who packed our lunches even when she was exhausted, and who told me every single morning before I walked out the door, "Alexandra, the only thing no one can ever take from you is what you put inside your own head." I believed her. My father, Richard Morgan, was not a deadbeat. I want to be clear about that. He paid his child support on time, showed up for birthdays and holidays, and was, by most measures, a decent father. But he was not present in the daily, ordinary, unglamorous way that my mother was. He was a businessman, a serious one. By the time I was in high school, he was on the board of Callaway Braxton Holdings, one of the largest private investment conglomerates in the Midwest. By the time I graduated college, he was the chairman. But here is the thing about Richard Morgan. He never once tried to hand me anything. Not a job, not a connection, not a single phone call on my behalf. He used to say, "I'll back you when you've proven you don't need me to." At 17, I found that infuriating. At 31, standing in that office with Derek Collins staring at me like I was furniture, I finally understood exactly what he meant. I graduated from Ohio State with a degree in business administration and a minor in communications. I graduated with honors. I put myself through with a combination of scholarship money, part-time work, and, yes, some financial support from my father. But the academic work, that was mine. Every grade, every late night in the library, every paper. After graduation, I moved to Chicago. I started at the bottom, an entry-level marketing coordinator at a mid-sized healthcare company called Prime Path Solutions. I was making $38,000 a year, splitting a 1-bedroom apartment with my college roommate Tanya Briggs, and eating a lot of ramen noodles. But I was learning every single day I was learning. Within 2 years, I'd been promoted twice. I was managing campaigns, leading a small team, and starting to develop a reputation in the industry as someone who could walk into a struggling brand and turn it around. That reputation is what got me the call from Callaway Braxton Holdings. I need to pause here and explain the structure of Callaway Braxton because it matters enormously to this story. Callaway Braxton Holdings is not one company. It's a parent company, a conglomerate that owns controlling shares in dozens of subsidiaries. Each subsidiary operates with its own leadership team, its own culture, its own day-to-day management. The parent company, the board, the chairman, sits above all of it. They set strategic direction, they oversee finances, they approve major decisions, but they are not involved in the daily operations of any single subsidiary. That distinction is critical. Remember it. Now, the subsidiary that I was offered a position in was called Vantage Meridian Group, a marketing and brand strategy firm that Callaway Braxton had acquired 3 years prior. Vantage Meridian had about 200 employees, offices in Chicago and Atlanta, and an absolutely outstanding reputation in the consumer goods sector. I want to be very clear about how I got this job. I did not call my father. I did not drop his name. I did not even know at first that Callaway Braxton owned Vantage Meridian. I got a LinkedIn message from a recruiter named Sandra Okafor, who had seen a profile piece written about me in a regional marketing publication. She reached out, we had a phone call, and she invited me to interview. I went through 5 rounds of interviews over 6 weeks. 5 rounds, panel interviews, case study presentations, one-on-one conversations with senior leadership. I earned that offer letter the old-fashioned way. When I accepted the position, senior brand strategist, a significant step up from where I'd been, I mentioned it to my father over dinner. He set down his fork, he looked at me carefully and said, "Alexandra, you know I'm on the board of their parent company." My stomach dropped. I had not known. I genuinely had not known. He said, "Does that concern you?" I thought about it for a long moment, and then I said, "I earned this job, Dad. I went through 5 interviews. They hired me for what I can do." He nodded slowly, and then he said, "Then there's nothing to be concerned about. Just do your job." And that was the last time we ever discussed it. He never called anyone at Vantage Meridian about me, never mentioned my name in any board meeting, never inserted himself in any way into my career there. I know this because I asked him directly years later. And I know this because of what happened when someone finally did get fired. They had absolutely no idea who my father was, not a single clue. I started at Vantage Meridian in September, 4 years before the events I'm about to describe. I walked in on my first day in a navy blazer I'd bought specifically for the occasion, carrying a leather portfolio Tanya had given me as a going-away gift, and I was ready. The office was beautiful. Open floor plan in the main area, glass-walled conference rooms, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Michigan Avenue, the kind of place that makes you stand at the elevator on your first morning and think, "I made it." My direct supervisor was a man named Derek Collins. Derek Collins was 44 years old when I joined his team. He was the vice president of brand development, a title that came with a corner office, a generous expense account, and an ego that had never once been told no by anyone who had power over him. He was tall, well-dressed, the kind of handsome that probably opened every door for him in his 20s and convinced him that he deserved every door that had ever opened. He had the handshake of a man running for office and the warmth of a man who had read a book about warmth and was now performing it. I'm being harsh, I know that. In the beginning, Derek Collins was actually fine to work for. He was demanding, yes. He was exacting. He had standards, and he expected those standards to be met. But in those early months, I didn't see that as a problem. I had been raised to meet high standards. I liked knowing what was expected of me. I liked being given hard work and proving I could do it. And I was good at my job, really good. In my first year, I led a repositioning campaign for one of our largest clients, a regional grocery chain called Harmon's Market, that increased their brand recognition scores by 31% and resulted in a $14 million contract renewal. Derek took me to lunch afterward and told me he was glad they'd hired me. That felt like genuine praise, and I held on to it. In my second year, I started noticing things. Small things at first. Derek would present my work in client meetings without fully crediting me. He'd say the team developed this, when in reality I had developed it and the team had given minor input. I mentioned this to him once, gently, after a meeting. He laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Alex, in this industry, the VP presents. That's just how it works." I let it go. But then there were the meetings I wasn't invited to, strategy sessions that directly related to campaigns I was running, and I'd find out about them afterward through a colleague named Marcus Webb, who would come back and fill me in with a look on his face that said, "I don't understand why you weren't in there." There were the compliments that were always followed by a qualifier. "Great work on this, though honestly, I would have pushed the creative further." Or, "The client loved your presentation. You just need to work on being more authoritative in the room." And there was the promotion I was passed over for. In my third year, a director of brand strategy position opened up. I applied. I had every qualification. I had the track record. I had the results. The position went to a man named Tyler Haynes, who had been at the company for 18 months and had never run a campaign of the scale I had. Derek called me into his office afterward and said, "You're on the right trajectory, Alex. Tyler just has a certain kind of executive presence that the clients responded to." I went home that night and sat in my kitchen for a very long time, trying to figure out if I was imagining a pattern or if the pattern was real. It was real. I know it was real because when I think about all the women on Derek's team, and there were several talented, brilliant women, none of us had ever been promoted to director or above under his leadership. But I stayed. I stayed because I believed in what I was building. I stayed because I loved the actual work. I stayed because I was not the kind of person who ran away from a hard situation when there was still a chance to change it from the inside. And then I got pregnant. His name is Marcus. Not Marcus Webb, my colleague, a different Marcus entirely. Marcus Davies, the man I had been in love with for 3 years by the time this story reaches its turning point. We met at a dinner party hosted by mutual friends, argued cheerfully about baseball for the entire evening, and exchanged numbers at the end of the night. He was an architect. Quiet where I was loud, patient where I was intense, and absolutely certain of himself in a way that made me feel completely safe. We moved in together after 18 months. When I got pregnant, we were over the moon. I found out on a Tuesday morning in February. I called Marcus at work. He left his office mid-meeting and called me back from the parking garage because he wanted privacy. When I told him, he was silent for a full 3 seconds, and then I heard him make a sound I had never heard from him before. This low, overwhelmed, joyful sound, like something had cracked open in his chest in the best way possible. We told our families that weekend. My mother cried. Happy tears, the kind that start before the person even finishes speaking because the news is so good it bypasses all of her filters. My brother Jason hugged me so hard he lifted me off the ground and then immediately started apologizing for lifting a pregnant woman. My father held my face in both hands, looked at me for a long moment, and said, Alexandra. Just my name. The way he says things when he doesn't have words for them. Then he cleared his throat, straightened his jacket, and said, "I expect regular updates." Classic Richard Morgan. I was 14 weeks pregnant when I told Vantage Meridian. HR first, as is the protocol. I met with our HR director, a woman named Bridget Callahan, and she walked me through my leave options, the company's maternity policy, and the transition plan we'd put in place for my accounts while I was out. It was professional and thorough and made me feel like the company had my back. I was required to inform my direct supervisor next. I scheduled a meeting with Derek Collins for the following morning. I want to be very precise about what happened in that meeting because I have replayed it many times since then, and every detail matters. I sat down across from him and I said, "Derek, I wanted to let you know I'm pregnant. I'm due in early August. I've already met with HR and we have a preliminary transition plan in place." He was quiet. Not the thoughtful kind of quiet, the calculating kind. And then he said, "Well, this certainly changes things." I asked him what he meant. He smiled, that political, empty smile, and said, "I just mean we'll have to be thoughtful about how we manage the workload. Don't worry about it." I left his office and called Bridget Callahan that afternoon and told her about the comment, verbatim. She documented it. That documentation would matter later. The next 3 months were the most professionally destabilizing of my career. It started subtly, the way a leak in a roof starts, not with a flood, but with a single drop, then 2 drops, then a stain on the ceiling. Then one day, the ceiling caves. My client meetings started getting reassigned. Not all at once. One here, one there. Derek always had a reason. The client requested someone with more bandwidth. Tyler has a stronger relationship with their new CMO. Let's move you to supporting rather than leading on this one, just while you're navigating the pregnancy. I pushed back every time. He always had an answer. I was removed from the pitch for a new account, a major athletic wear brand that I had helped develop the proposal for. I spent 60 hours on that proposal. When I asked Derek why I'd been pulled from the pitch team, he said, "Alex, you're going to be gone in a few months. It doesn't make sense to have you in the room when you won't be here to execute." I was not gone yet. I was standing right in front of him. My performance reviews, which had been exceptional for 3 consecutive years, suddenly had new concerns. Derek wrote that I was showing signs of reduced engagement, that I was struggling to maintain my previous output levels, that he had concerns about my long-term trajectory with the team. None of it was true. And here's what burns most about it, even now. I have the records. I have the emails showing I was responding to clients within the hour. I have the campaign metrics. I have the commendations from clients sent directly to Derek praising my work. I have all of it. But I was 31 years old and 7 months pregnant and fighting a VP on every front while also growing a human being inside my body, and I was exhausted in a way that I didn't have words for. Marcus would rub my feet at night and listen to me go through every detail of every day, and sometimes I would see a look on his face, this quiet fury, the kind that lives behind the eyes and stays controlled. And he'd say, "Alex, this is illegal. What he's doing is illegal." I knew that. I was documenting everything. What I did not know, what I could not have anticipated, was that Derek was building towards something. He wasn't just trying to sideline me. He was building a case to remove me entirely. I found out the extent of it on a Wednesday morning, 8 days before the moment I described at the very beginning of this story. Marcus Webb, my colleague and one of the few people at Vantage Meridian I trusted completely, stopped by my desk with a look on his face that I will never forget. He sat down, looked around to make sure no one was close, and said quietly, "Alex, I need to tell you something, and I need you to stay calm when I do." He told me that Derek had been meeting privately with HR, not Bridget Callahan, who I had a relationship with and who had documented my concerns, but with a senior HR executive named Jean Pruitt, who reported directly to Derek's peer group. Derek was putting together a performance improvement plan, a PIP, the kind that in most corporate environments is not designed to improve anything, the kind that's designed to create a paper trail that justifies a termination. He had been preparing it for 6 weeks. I sat at my desk after Marcus walked away and I breathed, just breathed. And then I picked up my phone and called my employment lawyer, a woman named Patricia Gaines, who I had retained months earlier when the reassignment started. She said, "Don't react, don't tip him off, document everything from this moment forward, and don't sign anything." I didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, Derek called me into his office. It was a Thursday. I remember the weather, gray sky, early April, the kind of Chicago morning that can't decide whether it wants to be winter or spring. I had worn a burgundy maternity dress and low heels and a blazer that I had gotten taken in slightly because I refused to walk into any meeting looking like I wasn't put together. His assistant, a young woman named Priya, caught my eye as I passed her desk. She had an expression that I'd learned to read over 4 years of working near her. It said, "Be careful." I walked in. Derek was standing at the window with his back to me, which I recognized as a power move. He'd done it before in meetings he wanted to control. He turned around slowly, gestured to the chair across from his desk, and sat down. The termination letter was already on his desk. He pushed it toward me. And then he said with the total calm of a man who felt absolutely untouchable, "Vantage Meridian is letting you go, effective today. Your performance has been consistently below expectations, and the company has determined this role is no longer a fit." I looked at the letter. I looked at him. I said, "Derek, you and I both know this is about my pregnancy." He leaned back in that chair, and he said it. "You're useless to me now." Those words. 7 months pregnant, sitting across from a man who had watched me build parts of his career for him, and that is what he said. He continued. He said the PIP had documented sufficient grounds, that the decision was final, that security would escort me out if I didn't leave voluntarily, that I should think carefully before making any legal claims because the company had extensive documentation and his legal team was already prepared. He said all of this with the measured confidence of a man who believed he had won. I thought about Patricia Gaines. I thought about every email I had saved, every document I had backed up to a personal drive, every timestamp, every performance metric. I thought about Bridget Callahan's file. I set the termination letter back on his desk without signing it. And I said, very quietly, "You should know, Derek, that I have been documenting everything, and so has HR." He waved his hand, dismissive. "Clean out your desk by noon." His phone rang. He glanced at it, frowned slightly, the way you do when you see a name you weren't expecting, a name that sits above your entire world in the hierarchy of things that command your attention. He answered it, and I heard my father's voice, measured, calm, the voice of a man who has run boardrooms for 20 years and has never needed to raise it. "Derek, step outside." Derek looked at me. I looked at him. And I truly believe that was the moment the floor started shifting beneath his feet. My father had not been following this situation in real time. I want to be very clear about that because I know how this story sounds. I know it can seem like there was a plan, like I was waiting for some moment to deploy my father like a weapon. That's not what happened. What happened is this. A week before that Thursday, I had told my father that I believed I was about to be terminated. I told him because he's my father, because I was scared and angry and exhausted, and he is one of the 4 people in the world I talk to when things are truly serious. I told him the way a daughter tells her father something terrible is happening, not asking him to fix it, just needing him to know. He listened to everything I told him. He asked me precise, careful questions about the timeline, about the documentation, about who in HR had been involved, about the specific nature of the performance documentation Derek had created. And when he was done, he was quiet for a moment. And then he said, "Alexandra, I am going to look into this. Not as your father, as the chairman of the board of the company that owns Vantage Meridian, because if what you're describing is accurate, it is not only a violation of your rights as an employee, it is a significant legal and ethical liability for Callaway Braxton Holdings, and it needs to be addressed regardless of whether you are my daughter." I said, "Dad, I don't want you to fight this for me." He said, "I'm not fighting it for you. I'm doing my job." He spent that week doing exactly what he said, reviewing documentation with Callaway Braxton's general counsel, pulling HR records, speaking quietly to Bridget Callahan, who had already filed an internal compliance concern. He had not planned to call Derek that Thursday. What changed it was a message Priya, Derek's assistant, sent to a compliance hotline that Wednesday night. She had overheard Derek instructing someone to delete a series of email threads. She reported it. That was the moment my father
Derek
picked up
stepped
the phone.
out of his office to take that call. I could hear fragments of it through the glass, Derek's voice shifting from polished to strained to something closer to desperate. There were long silences where he was listening. His shoulders dropped. He started touching his collar the way people do when they can't get enough air. When he came back in, he looked like a different person. He could not look at me. He said nothing. He walked to his desk and stood there, and I could see him trying to calculate a way out of the room he had built for himself. 47 minutes later, I was told by Bridget Callahan, who came to find me in the lobby where I had been sitting with my phone in my hands, not quite sure what to do, that Derek Collins had been placed on immediate administrative leave pending a formal investigation. He was terminated 9 days later. His termination letter cited violations of federal employment law, failure to comply with company HR protocols, and, because of what Priya had reported, potential destruction of company records. There was no PIP, there was no paper trail that helped him. Because the thing about a man who believes he is untouchable is that he never bothers to cover all the exits. My son was born on August 6th. We named him Elijah Marcus Davies. He weighed 7 pounds, 4 ounces, had a full head of dark hair, and screamed with an outrage that Marcus said sounded like he already had opinions about things. He was, and is, the greatest thing I have ever been part of. I took my 12 weeks of maternity leave. Vantage Meridian, in the aftermath of the investigation, went through significant leadership restructuring. 3 members of senior management were either terminated or resigned. The company settled with me. I'm not able to share the specific terms, but I will say that Patricia Gaines did extraordinary work, and the settlement reflected the full weight of what I had experienced. I did not return to Vantage Meridian. I want to be honest about that decision because some people expected me to go back, to reclaim my place, to walk in and be the triumphant one who survived. But the truth is, I didn't want to go back. That chapter was closed. The energy I'd spent fighting for 4 years, I wanted to direct it somewhere new. I spent 3 months at home with Elijah. Real, full, present months. Mornings in the rocking chair by the window, walks in the park, learning what it felt like to move at a slower pace for the first time in my adult life. Marcus would bring us lunch on his break sometimes. He'd walk in, set the food down, look at me and Elijah, and just smile. This quiet, steady smile. And I thought, this is the thing I could have lost if I'd let fear keep me from fighting. In January, I started my own brand strategy consultancy. It's called Meridian & Co. Yes, that name was intentional. In our first year, we worked with 11 clients. In our second year, 23. We now have a team of 9 people, and I am proud of every single one of them. Marcus Webb, my former colleague, is my director of client strategy. My father has never asked me for anything in connection with the business. He's never introduced me to a client, never mentioned us in a board meeting. When I won our first major retainer, a 7-figure contract with a national healthcare brand, I called him to tell him. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "That's my girl." And then he cleared his throat and said he had a meeting to get back to. Classic Richard Morgan. I have thought a lot about why I'm telling this story. Because it would have been easier not to. Easier to settle, stay quiet, cash the check, and get on with my life. A lot of people do that. I understand why. The fight is exhausting. The world doesn't always reward the people who speak up. But here's what I know. Derek Collins counted on my silence. He counted on the fact that I was tired and pregnant and that most people in that building would assume he had the power and I didn't. He forgot, or he never knew, that power and title are not the same thing. He forgot that the woman sitting across from him had spent her entire life being underestimated. And he forgot, most importantly, that he did not know everything about the world he was operating in. He thought he knew all the exits. He didn't know about my father. And even if my father had never made that call, even if I had walked out of that building with just my box and my documentation and my lawyer, I would have found another way. Because that's what I was taught. By a woman who ironed her scrubs the night before every shift, by a father who told me he'd back me when I didn't need him to, and by 4 years of learning exactly how much I was worth from a man who didn't have a clue. My name is Alexandra Morgan. I didn't need saving, but I was very glad my father picked up the phone.